Can you walk through how did you plan or approach your retirement from the military?
Yeah, so that's there's a practical answer to that, and then part of that is also an emotional answer to that, right? So everybody makes a decision to retire at one point. Everybody has the last day, right? That's sort of the common saying that people tell you, especially people who have already retired. And um, so, but the approach I took was I kind of understood like firmly the reasons why I was leaving, why I was going to retire. And so it was pulling me out more than keeping me in. And so the things that were keeping me in were, my love of service, love wearing the uniform, the cloth of our nation, and it's been nothing but absolutely awesome for me and my family too. But at some point, I think Jen, my wife, and I realized that um, we would, there's more that's going to be asked of us, and we weren't ready. We weren't at the stage of life to be able um, to 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 continue on for the next 5 or 10 more years. And so that was the emotional piece. And so the emotional piece, once you get that under control, right? Like you understand that, you fully grasp that your career is over and it's even hard for me to say that right now. Your career, my career is over. I'm retired. But it was definitely tough when I made that decision. And at the same time, the Army is a relational thing. So you have to tell your friends, you got to tell your boss, you got to tell your branch. And so once you tell everybody, as you know, right? Like that's why you announced it kind of early. I kind of announced it sort of just on a ski trip. Like this is really nice. This life that we have here is really nice, and I just don't want to be separated from my family if I continued on, which likely would have happened. And so once you get the emotional piece under control and come really to be at peace with it, then you got to make the deliberate decision, right? Or deliberate plan about what is the next 18, 12 months going to look like. So I had made the decision about like I think 20 to 18 months from my actual retirement day. So that was really helpful because certain things didn't matter for me anymore. My OER didn't matter for me. I still worked out, but ACFT didn't matter to me as much. But I still did my job, and those that same sort of the professional standard I maintained. But at some point, I realized that I had to create a plan for myself, and then I had to break loose, right? I had to go and deliberately focus on telling my boss that, hey, sir, I need to be able to like plan out skill bridge. I'm 2 weeks into the skill bridge window, and I still haven't made much of strides about my application, my resume, and so forth. And so that's where when you make that decision and you start creating that plan, you have to be very deliberate with it. The second part of it, in terms of deliberate planning, is going and do the homework on the things that really matter, right? So the first thing that Rob Massey talked about was your VA benefits. That matters, right? Not just because about the money that's associated. It's about being taken care of and getting all those issues that while you were in Iraq or Afghanistan that you had issues with get taken care of. And that doesn't mean a percentage point. That means getting the VA to recognize those things so that you and your family can get taken care of. So identifying those things which are really important. So for me, it was the VA. The second piece was I knew that I had to find a job, as soon or close to when I retired. I can do maybe 1 to 3 months. I kind of knew what our cash reserves were. But I'm a single, income earner. We made a deliberate decision that my wife would stay at home with our kids, and that's been really beneficial to our family. But I knew sort of what my cash reserves would entail, would allow us to go into whether it's 3 months or 6 months. So we had, I think, between 3 to 6 months of money without considering what my pension and VA disability would entail. So we planned that out too. And And so I made a plan for that. And the last piece is sort of a plan for our family, right? Um, so where were the kids going to go to school? Were we happy where we're going to be at? And so we were, and so that those were sort of important. But then we had to make some discussions about personal finance and these other considerations that would inform, the second, which is the job, and then first, and the VA process as well, too. So, so that's sort of how I approached it when I made that decision. But the emotional piece, brother, that's a tough thing, that you have to kind of go through.
Lots of things you said really resonated with me. One of the things you said that made me smile though is when you said that, as soon as you stop caring about your OER, and I remember that moment very clearly. And what's surprising is once I stopped caring about my OER, my performance, I think, actually increased because then I was taking more risk. I was
Yeah.
doing what I thought was right, regardless of what sometimes my superiors or other people thought. And in lots of ways, I wish I was operating like that, 5 or 10 years ago, but lesson learned there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think for a lot of folks, it's a scary time. Um, and I think some people can look at the guy who's retiring as like, oh man, that guy's not doing enough, or look at what he's saying. The reality is that you're still in it, right? You're not in it to win it, but you're in it to contribute to the mission. You're in it for the people that you're working with and for. But it gives people pause because they go and say, well, why is he still busting his butt off, right? Busting his butt, right? But I mean, but at some point, you got to be able to tell people no. You got to be able to break away, take informational interviews. And your chain command, if you're lucky enough, should be able to support you. I was fortunate to have a good chain command that helped me. But even then, right? Organizational inertia will keep you in as long as possible, right? They care about you. They say they care about you, but at the end of the day, the organization is going to try to take care of itself. Whether it's but despite what you really need professionally and personally, right? So that's a consideration that you got to keep in the back of your mind as you're retiring. It's not to be selfish, but at some point you have to be somewhat selfish um, to take care of yourself and your family because nobody's going to allow you to go to the VA appointments that you need to be able to go to unless you say, I need to go. And this is part of the process. And so I think they have to honor that to a degree too, right?
So you said you made this decision about 18 to 20 months beforehand. What did the next 6 months or so look like for you? So like the 12 to 18 months before retirement,
Yeah.
what should
Yeah.
retiring service members be like focus on during that time frame?
Yeah. So I do planning for a living for the Army, and that's one of the reasons why Deloitte hired me. We'll get to that in probably a few minutes, but so I took a very deliberate approach. I'm not a huge like write out a timeline sort of guy. I do that for work, but for me, I kind of knew the dates, right? 180 days, right? I needed to be in the VSO's office, right? I wanted to find a VSO. I don't feel comfortable paying somebody, and I'm okay. I don't judge anybody that does to pay a company to help them if that's what they're comfortable with. But for me, I was like, I could do this by myself. I've done it throughout my entire career, and I can plan this out, and I can learn the process, the VA process, which I thought was really the most important thing as you go into it, because it's benefits, VA benefits on delivery upon discharge, right, is BDD. Is one of those things where if you get it wrong, it's going to take you a little time to get it right. And as Rob tells you, it's one of those things you don't want to get wrong. And so, I planned it out 180 days. I had my medical records printed out. I highlighted it. I knew what were the issues with me. But the next 6 months, I planned on like going to TAPS, right? I planned to go to it twice. One at the very initial piece of it so I can understand and learn. And then later on, when I was closer to the 6 month point to where I was about to retire, to go back and relearn it. So to ensure that I was not forgetting a step, right? So I would, you know, check, little blocks to check off. That's what I did, right? And then so when I went into the VA, I understood that I wanted to get a VSO to help me with the process. So, and then, and I found the Wounded Warrior Project, and they've been super helpful. But I didn't go to them before the 180 days, right? Like I found them, created an appointment, but I had done all the homework myself. I printed off all my paperwork beforehand, because installation allows you to do so. You print it out, you highlight the points, you go do the research on the things that you can actually claim, right? So bad back, sleep apnea, anxiety, whatever it is that individuals have, you note that stuff down. And there's a guide in the VA that can kind of lay that out for you. And that's on your 180 days when you sit down with your VSO, you can kind of go through the claims process, right? And then you go through the paperwork to fill out the paperwork for your claim. But you have done most of the homework beforehand. And so that's important to do, right? So that's why when you say you're going to retire, you go through the process, you tell the people that matter, and then you then take a deliberate approach to doing the homework and then gather the information, create that plan, and then start executing along the timeline.
If I can make sure that I got the timeline right then, so you kind of made the decision year and a half, and then basically up until 180 days, 6 months
Yeah.
before retirement, you are doing the
Yeah.
printing medical records, going to get doctor's
Yeah.
appointments, getting your sleep study test.
Yeah. So,
But
so
that
yeah. So I'm sorry to cut you off, Rob. So I'll admit, so I'm not a smart man. I'm not a smart man, but I know what right looks like, right? And so, one of the things I realized when I looked at my medical records, when I asked installation to look at my medical records, I just realized I took it and it was like that thin, man. Like it was hardly anything. I was like one of those guys that never went into the clinics, never went to the medics, for any ailments. I just suck it up, right? And it got worse, I think, when I became a staff officer, professional staff officer. I just never went in. And so until, I really had some health issues. And so when I looked at my medical records, because that was one of the first things, I was like, oh well, what does it look like right now? Nothing was hardly there, right? Other than, oh, I tore my knee, I had to go get a sleep apnea machine. I'm okay to disclose that, right? When I was rowing hard as a planner at U.S. Army Europe, and so those are the only things that were there. So I was like, man, I got to get looked at, and so I went to see, my PCM. I found out what his name was, and I went to see him, talk to him about my back, that I had issues with, the migraines I would have like almost every month, that would take me to the parking lot to lay down. And so I made it a point to talk to my PCM, and then luckily he was able to get me to the TBI clinic, and they get seen by a PA there. And I went through physical therapy, and I was religious when it came to going to see the physical therapist about the issues I had. So that was really helpful, right? And so by the time I went at the 180-day point, I had, it went from here to there, right? Because luckily I had a PA who was super awesome at chronicling all my issues.